Content warning. This podcast episode contains discussions of a sensitive nature that may be triggering for some individuals.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. My name is Dee Moore, and I am a kidney warrior. This podcast is dedicated to encourage, educate, and inspire as we explore all aspects of kidney disease, related chronic illnesses, and health. In today's episode, I am bringing you a kidney warrior story. Now, there's always something you can learn from someone's story, something that can bring inspiration and hope. My guest today from Hampshire, England, is Tony Kaye. Tony has been on a kidney journey filled with twists, setbacks, and moments of real courage. From a shock diagnosis to life-changing treatments, from frustration and fear to unexpected triumphs. His story reminds us that even in the hardest seasons, there's always hope, strength, and purpose to be found. Tony's story is honest, emotional, and deeply inspiring. So join me as we walk through his journey together. Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Tony?
I'm very well, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm really looking forward to today's interview because it's my favorite type of interview, which is Kidney Warrior Story. And everyone knows what I'm going to say. I love recording Kidney Warrior Story interviews because there's so much you can learn from someone's lived experience with CKD. So I'm really excited about our interview today.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So I'm going to start with my first question. And my first question is, how did your kidney warrior journey begin? And how were you diagnosed?
So, my kidney warrior journey began really whilst I was at college. I was training to become a personal trainer and was having regular checkups with the doctors just to make sure I was in good health. For a while, my blood pressure was quite high, and the doctor just passed it off as a white coat syndrome and just a blip with me being anxious about being in the doctor's office. And then we fast forward a little bit to the point where I am out socializing with a friend. I felt unwell, so I went home. That evening, I felt really, really poorly. Had an ambulance called for me. They took me to hospital. And after a whole bunch of tests, they took a while to come back and tell me that my kidneys were failing. And there was going to be various other conversations throughout the day and the week with lots of different people to determine sort of where I'm at stage-wise.
So that must have come as a complete shock. A young person living your normal life and then getting these symptoms, but essentially being brushed off in terms of you've had these symptoms and the doctor's like, oh, well, it's because you're stressed or whatever. How did that make you feel that effectively you'd been ignored?
Well, initially I felt shock, sadness that things were going on that we knew nothing about. And honestly, there were a few tears shed over the fact that initially I'd been told that my kidney was failing and there was essentially not much else known until further tests were done by this point. So I cried, I called my family to talk to them, and it was just sadness, anxiety, and panic all around for a little while.
So how long was it before you got an actual diagnosis?
Roughly 2 weeks. I'd spent a week in my local hospital here in Basingstoke, and then pretty swiftly after they'd come up with a diagnosis, it was, we need to get this checked. We're sending you to Portsmouth QA Hospital for further tests just to confirm this, which, quite honestly, I was panicked about because they had told me something and then said, we need to confirm this.
So during the stage that you were waiting to get the diagnosis, did they explain to you what it meant to be in kidney failure? Did you have an understanding about kidney disease?
So initially I had no understanding. I didn't even know what it was, and I didn't realise how severe it was until they'd sent me to Portsmouth and someone sort of sat down and was like, "You look like you have no idea about what's going on. Let's talk about it. Let me explain to you what it is and what the next steps are going to be."
When you finally did get the diagnosis, what was the diagnosis?
So the diagnosis went as IgA nephropathy at stage 4 CKD.
So quite a late diagnosis in terms of the stage, which I can relate to myself because I was stage 4 when I was diagnosed. That is very advanced. And did you have an understanding of that being advanced, or was everything kind of like still a blur at this time?
Honestly, everything was just rushing through my head at once. I was still very nervous and very scared about what was coming next and what stage 4 meant. And at that point, I think I just kind of froze in time for a few minutes to be like, "Oh no, what's happening?" And after breathing, it was very much okay, what is this and what can I do?
So how did your life change at this point? You've just found out that you've got stage 4 kidney disease. Did they speak to you about any treatment, about anything that could potentially slow the decline down or even reverse it? Did they speak to you about anything like that?
So at the point I was at stage 4, they did say initially that a change in diet and habits during my lifestyle would potentially help bring it back a little bit and prevent it going into stage 5 rapidly and causing all sorts of numerous problems alongside.
So how was that change? What did you do to try and help?
So initially, after the dust had settled from all the shock of this happening, I looked into what exercise I could do to help the process and help me feel healthier and fitter. And I also looked at my diet to see what needed to be changed to keep me as healthy as possible for as long as physically possible.
So I know that unfortunately your kidney function declined further and you went into stage 5, also known as end-stage renal failure. How did you find out?
So initially, I'd gone back for a regular checkup. I think it was 8 weeks after the initial diagnosis. I went back, they did their annual bloods, and unfortunately, my efforts to slow down this process will make it better. Not going to get better, but a stage where it's not going to continue to worsen, as it were. My efforts had fallen short, and I was at stage 5, end stage renal failure, 8 weeks later.
You made the statement that your efforts fell short, but from my knowledge of IgA nephropathy, it is a condition where the kidney function declines. So I really don't want you to feel like your effort wasn't enough, but your effort still may have made a difference in terms of you may have reached there even earlier if you hadn't have made those changes. So I really want to encourage you that your effort definitely wasn't in vain.
Thank you.
So after you got the diagnosis that you were at stage 5, did they now start talking about dialysis or transplantation? What was the discussion at that time?
The discussion started out by talking about the process of dialysis and how essentially I'd need to be on dialysis in order to clear out all the toxins and the products from the blood. And there'd be no really avoiding this, but they would do it on based on how I'm feeling as an individual. And at that point, I knew it wouldn't be long before ultimately I ended up on dialysis. However, they did say the ultimate goal is for us to get you a kidney transplant and get you back to life as normal.
What modality of dialysis did you choose?
After reviewing all the options, I decided peritoneal dialysis was my ultimate first choice. I started out on the overnight machine and then swiftly realized that the things like the drain pain and stuff were way too much for me. Then onto the gravity bags, and ultimately that stopped working, in which time I had a neckline fitted for haemodialysis, which sadly became infected through no fault of my own. There was an infection in the internal side of the line, so it wasn't picked up. I ended up in a coma in hospital, and ultimately it was then the fistula was the only option left after that.
Wow, you went through so much there. So let's just rewind slightly and go to the first part. So you said that you wanted to start with PD, peritoneal dialysis. Why did you choose PD over HD at that point?
Ultimately, to me personally, it seemed like the least invasive and the least likely that something is going to go terribly wrong. And that was just from doing my own research and having a few conversations with a couple of people I had met whilst visiting clinics. And, we all get talking in the waiting room and talk about what we've researched and what we've looked at. And ultimately, the comfort inside me said, look, maybe this be the best choice so I could continue to do the job that I was doing at this time.
You mentioned about experiencing really severe drain pain. For people who don't know what drain pain is, can you please explain to them what drain pain is?
When the tube catheter is in your peritoneum, which is the lining of the stomach, it acts like a giant straw. So you imagine you are taking a drink out of your water glass or what have you. That last drop where it's the sort of last straw and you can hear the sound, it's that sort of effect, but inside you, and the line has pinched something inside the peritoneum, which can cause quite severe, sharp pains. And for anyone who's experienced it, you'll know most of us get very sore, very unhappy, and some people even shed tears. I did the first couple of times, and I'm not ashamed to admit that because that's the hardest thing I've ever experienced.
I can totally relate to that. My drain pain when I started PD was horrendous. But for anybody who wants to know more about PD, check out the Introduction to Peritoneal Dialysis episode. We talk about strategies to help drain pain, plus going quite in detail about PD, so please do check out that episode. You mentioned that you went on to using the bags instead. So again, for people who don't know what the bags means, as opposed to the machine version of PD, could you just give a quick explanation of what that is?
So the bags is essentially the same fluid that would go into your system to draw out the toxins, and the fluid would then be, again, drained out of your system. But the bags, one hangs up on the height of the door, and gravity feeds through a tube into the peritoneal catheter, and then sits in your stomach, some for 4 hours, some for 8 hours, and then some for 12 hours. But initially, I went through the 4 hours in the morning to get me right up to the point where I need to go to work. And then I put an 8-hour bag in. And then when I come back from work, take out, put a 12-hour in so that I could go to sleep overnight.
Right. So you had different bags for different lengths of time that the fluid would sit in your peritoneum and draw out those toxins. So actually, people are very familiar with the 4-hour bags where you're changing the bags every 4 hours, but actually there's 8 and 12-hour bags too. So that's definitely worth knowing, which means that you're doing the peritoneal dialysis less often rather than 4 times a day, 3 times a day. And that can make a big difference for someone who's working. So that's also a great tip for people out there to know. You then had to switch to haemodialysis through a line, and unfortunately that line became infected, and unfortunately you ended up in a coma. So tell me a bit more about that experience.
I'd finished treatment one night after my home hemo had finished its session. I brushed it off because now that I was on home hemodialysis, I'd assumed, I could go out and be fine, come back to my treatment. Did my treatment, came off as normal. Everything was fine. The statistics in my book from the machine's information had told me, yep, your clearance was fine. Everything is fine. And there was the right amount of treatment for me at that time. I went to bed just feeling a little bit like I was coming down with a cold. So, me being me, not knowing that something was wrong, went to bed. And, well, the next thing I know, I was on the floor, not knowing what was going on, what the day of week it was, and that I hadn't responded to anyone on my socials or spoken to my family. And the rest of it, honestly, is really a little bit of piecing a puzzle together, because I was being rushed into hospital after them having to break down my door. By that point, I was in such a state, I was not making any sense. And they put me into this coma thing. And I spent, I think it was 2 weeks there. And I didn't know what was happening because I was under. So I didn't know what day of the week it was, what had happened. Next thing I know, I was waking up in hospital. They explained to me that they'd had to remove my infected neckline, which immediately panic sets in, because that's my lifeline, as it were. And then once I'd come round and they were happy with everything to release me, I was released home under the instruction that I needed to have another form of treatment. But amongst that, I needed to speak to someone about my mental well-being, because, as you can imagine, being terrified, not knowing where that time had gone and everything, was quite distressing for myself, and my poor family were unsure whether I was okay or not. None of us knew. We were taking it day by day. So I went to the therapist. I've spoken to a lot of therapists. They've had me back at the ICU where I spent all that time to talk me through what had happened, shown me the equipment, where I was, and handed me a step-by-step diary to show what the nurses had kept for me to sort of give me some sort of fill in the gap, as it were.
And did that help you come to terms, like get your head around what had happened during that time?
For me personally, I believe it did, but it also made me realize that, I was going to struggle with the reality of that for months and months to come. I mean, even now, I still sometimes get a certain smell. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, that's bringing back memories. And you know what? I've come to terms with it, and I've been like, well, okay, this has happened. You are okay. You are a stronger person because of it.
Fortunately, because you already had a fistula fitted, you were then able to continue haemodialysis through needles. So how was the experience of doing haemodialysis through needles as opposed to through the line?
Honestly, the reason we initially went for a line was because I had a horrendous phobia of needles. And the idea that I wasn't able to continue on the line for the traumatic experiences was horrifying to me. They showed me a needle the first day in dialysis, and the poor nurse had to catch me. I fainted, which in itself, can be quite traumatic and quite upsetting, because I had worn out all my other options, and I was very upset for a number of days. I got the tremors, and I couldn't physically needle myself, until one day it sort of dawned on me, the fact that if you don't do this at home, you are going to be stuck in a hospital unit 3 days a week. And I was like, but I've just got into the routine of doing my various healthy lifestyle stuff to keep me healthy throughout my dialysis.
So what was it? How did it finally click that you could then needle yourself?
So, as some of you are aware, there are two different types of needling for dialysis. There's the buttonhole, which is a pre-created hole that you use with blunt needles. I struggled to break the barrier for that, because it was just so daunting that something blunt was about to pierce the skin. And that made me nauseous, anxious, and quite frankly, I had panic attacks for days not being able to do that, until I was 2 weeks down the line in home hemodialysis training, where they were like, this isn't working. You're going to have to go back to the hospital if you don't get this. I was like, that's terrifying. Is there an option that isn't a blunt needle? They're like, yes, we can use rope ladder technique, which is essentially putting a sharp needle in top and bottom, venous and arterial, and then working your way up, and every session is a new pierced hole, and then working your way back down to the bottom and then back up again, treating the effects of a rope bladder. And the bit that clicked was when I realized, you know what, it's not as horrifying with a sharp needle, because, you're creating a fresh hole, and it doesn't really seem as horrifying to me to have to do that. But essentially, the thing that broke the barrier was, look, you're either going to do this, or you're in a center, or worst case scenario, you're going to end up dead. And after everything I fought through with the dialysis journey, I could not accept that. I couldn't bring myself to accept that. And it clicked, and I did it the first time out, and I was like, you know what? That's a big weight off my shoulder.
It's good to know that you have different options in terms of needling. It's not just one or the other. You can find what works for you. And I'm so glad that it worked for you. It must have been so liberating knowing that actually I can now go back home, do my dialysis at home, and have more autonomy and control.
Oh, absolutely. The nurse has a wet shoulder from my tears. I was so happy. I cried about it. I was like, absolutely.
So I know you went on to have a kidney transplant. How did that come about?
So, for those that don't know, we are put on a long list where we wait, and the number of years on dialysis accumulates a certain number of points. And when your number is close to the top and they have a viable kidney for you, you get the call, you go to a hospital, they do their tests to figure out whether this kidney is actually suitable for you. It doesn't always happen first time, I'm really sad to say. For some people, they experience this several times, which is really heartbreaking. I personally experienced 5 other times where they had called me, and for one reason or another, the kidney was just not viable, because they would be sending me home worse off than I started. So after that amount of time, it was heartbreaking.
Sorry, 5 times. So you're getting on with your life, doing your thing, maybe even sleeping at the time, and you get a phone call out of nowhere saying, we've got a kidney for you. Now, one time would be really, really, really devastating to be like, yeah, I've got the call, and then it doesn't happen. But 5 separate times, that's really, really difficult. How did you manage to cope with that disappointment so many different times?
In all honesty, the first time I was down and quite upset, because I was hoping that would have been it. After it happened, I got depressed about it, honestly, and I had to talk to someone, because me personally, I tend to shut the door and block the world out. And after it happening twice, I was like, you know what? I can't let this stop my life for a while on end. And so I started talking to people. And after so many times, I was like, you know what? This has been a learning experience for what I have to go through, and then what I'm going to need to prepare for when the time does come. So after I pulled myself from a bout of depression over the matter, it got easier, in the sense that I was mentally prepared and had the tools to be like, yes, this has happened. This is going to continue happening until the kidney is suitable and makes things better for you. And I was okay with that, knowing that they were doing their best to find me the perfect kidney for my active and healthy lifestyle.
So you mentioned that you were maintaining a healthy and active lifestyle, which for everything that you were going through in terms of dialysis, people might be surprised that you were able to do that. So what were you doing in terms of keeping active and healthy?
As a lot of people know who are on dialysis, you gain a lot of fluid weight. And for those that don't know, fluid weight is basically all the water that is kept in your system as a result of your kidneys not filtering out all the toxins and all the water products. That becomes quite hard to manage breathing properly in some cases, movement because of the weight of the swelling in the legs or the fatigue generally. I realized that if I could maintain being active, that I would help myself feel better physically and emotionally, which led to me taking up distance running. I started out with a 5 kilometer park run, and it led to me throughout dialysis doing various running events, starting out with a local challenge, which was 3 kilometers, and working my way right the way up to half marathon running, whilst still doing treatment throughout the entire process. My last half marathon was done whilst I was doing home haemodialysis through my fistula 6 days a week.
That is incredible. I think people would be really surprised to hear that that's even possible. And, having said that, everyone's different and running is your exercise of choice. For somebody else, it could be something different. For me, it's badminton. For someone else, it could be walking. But what is your advice in terms of how someone, there may be somebody who was previously very active or somebody who might be wanting to be active for the first time. What advice do you have for them in terms of people might think, oh my gosh, I could never do a half marathon, but let's talk about 100-meter walk as a start, wherever it is that they begin. What advice do you have for them for getting a bit more active as a kidney patient?
As a kidney patient, you will be well aware of your limits and how much you can do. The first thing to know before you go out is how much you are actually going to be able to do. Not necessarily in distance, just how much you can, walk to the end of the road and back without overly exerting your system to the point where you then spend 2 days, 3 days afterwards in the chair or in bed because you've overdone it. So just remember, you'll have your fluid restriction. So that just means, for those who don't know, on treatment, you are allotted an amount of fluid depending on your urine output. So keeping that in mind, you then want to be like, so I'm going to go out one day and walk halfway between my front door and, the end of the road, for example, and then come back. Keeping in mind that you are not overdoing it to start with, because you will then put yourself off because you're really hurting the first day. But if that's okay, then the next time you go out, say, for example, the next day you are saying, I am going to go 5 steps further. So you'll do halfway up the road and 5 extra steps. Just build up slowly, because what you do not want to do is put yourself in a position where you are struggling to then function through your day-to-day life. And the sweat that you lose is also then fluid that you lose, which then allows you to drink that little bit more through that day. Or if you're using ice cubes or frozen fruit to give yourself the feeling of hydration, then you can then have a few more. But you've still got to be very careful of your doctor's recommendation and your allowance that you've been allotted by your unit or your doctor, so you do not do yourself an injustice and put yourself back in hospital.
Excellent advice there. You do have to know your limits and definitely be very, very, very careful when it comes to your fluid limits as well. So after 5 times of receiving the call but not receiving the kidney, finally you got the call and got your kidney. So tell me about the call and the process of getting that transplant.
So on the day of the 11th, I was going about my day-to-day life. I had my dinner. Ironically, it was a jacket potato, my favourite food. And then got ready for bed, got into bed, went to sleep. My phone rings 2:45 in the morning to tell me, we're sorry to wake you. We just wanted to inform you that we have a kidney and there is a taxi waiting outside to bring you to the hospital. Which, early morning, me personally, I am not really a morning person. I barely know what I'm doing in the mornings half the time. And both excitement, nerves, and anxiety built up instantly. I grabbed my transplant go bag, as it were. For those that don't know what that is all the stuff that you're going to need for your transplant stay in hospital, clothes, medication, and, well, for me, it's headphones, my mobile device, and something to stream something on to watch, because I knew I was going to be there a while. Got into the taxi. 2 hours later, arrived at my transplant hospital. Got there. My regular nurse that looks after me was there on shift. So they took me for a lot of blood tests, some scans to check the area of where they're going to put the kidney to make sure everything was okay. Swabs. At this point, we were still swabbing COVID to make sure that we didn't have COVID. The swabs for MRSA, and so that's nose and various other parts, just to make sure that we are being thorough in testing to make sure that everything is covered for every eventuality. So we knew my blood type, but I had no COVID, no other conditions that were going to mean that I couldn't get this kidney. After that, I waited and waited. The transplant surgeon, the anaesthetist, and the doctor who was coming to tell me that I'm perfectly healthy, everything's fine, and that the transplant was a viable match and was going to work as well as it will coming from my donor. And I signed the pieces of paper saying that I give consent for this surgery and the stay in hospital and everything that goes alongside that, saying that if I needed extra blood, resuscitation, or whatever eventuality might play out, that I was happy for them to go ahead and do it and keep me alive, as it were, and functioning to the best standard of health I physically can.
You have your surgery, you wake up. How did you feel?
I woke up and I was feeling very tired, but I was waking up from anesthetic. So anyone who's had a surgery knows that feeling. I first of all was in disbelief. I had to ask the nurse, was it a success? Did it go well? Were there any problems? After being told that, relief, happiness, and overall just, it felt like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders, knowing that I wouldn't have to dialyse again. If the doctor told me that it was that successful, it didn't need waking, the kidney didn't need dialysis to help it wake up, because as those that are going through the process know, the kidney doesn't always wake up straight away, might need a little bit of, hey, little guy, let's give you some treatment to give you the motivation to start functioning, as it were, so to speak. And mine was fine. I didn't need any extra dialysis. Like, you're going to be dialysis free for as long as this kidney remains healthy, well looked after, and there's no real problems. So, yeah, the relief, I have to say, doesn't even come close to winning my first event. You know, it's like Christmas come early, really, but 10 times over, because it's saved my life and I'm still standing because of it. It's fantastic.
So what difference has receiving that kidney made to your life?
So it has meant that I'm not missing 5 hours of my day doing treatment, which means that I can socialize more. I can go to the gym and live some kind of normal life. And particularly in my case, I am now training for more events. I am fundraising for the charity Kidney Care. And overall, I am able to go on holiday, see family members without the restriction or back of the mind, oh no, I've got to rush home to do my treatment. So it's like I've regained my freedom in less words than 100. There's so many things that it's done differently, you know. As people know who have had a transplant, people are most excited about producing urine for the first time in many, many years. I have to say, I was definitely one of those people. And it really is the smaller things in life that you find so much more precious, and the time that you spend with your loved ones so much more valuable and important to you because you have experienced this, and it gives all that back to you, knowing that you're going to have much more time without panicking that you're going to end up in hospital, or worst case scenario, end up sleeping forever, as it were. It's just a blessing in itself that someone's donated this to me, and I am now able to do everything that I've wanted to do, obviously within the limits of my limitations, and as long as I take my medication the way I should do to allow my body to continue to function and exist the way it should.
So you've continued doing well with your transplanted kidney, and I know that you even took part in the Transplant Games. Tell us about that.
Just before I hit my 1 year mark of this fantastic kidney transplant, I travelled to Nottingham and took part in the Transplant Games. For those that don't know, this is a series of sporting events, games for the youngsters, for anyone who has had a transplant, to all come together as one big community to take part in sports and movement, to show that it really is a fantastic way to show that we have a new lease of life and that we are doing better. For me personally, I took part in the swimming and cycling, in which I took third place in my age category, coming back with a bronze medal, which honestly, one of the proudest moments of my life, being my first Transplant Games and coming back with a medal. Besides that, I took part in the 5-kilometre donor run, which is open to transplant patients, their families, and the donors who have donated organs to people to allow them the new lease of life, which is fantastic. It is such a great event to allow everyone to be a part of it and get to know each other's stories through movement.
That truly is amazing, and it's nice to see the difference that it makes to so many people's lives. I mean, transplantation saves lives, it changes lives, and it's just wonderful to see so many people that have benefited in such a positive way from transplantation.
Absolutely.
With all the highs and all the lows, there came another low, and you were involved in an accident, unfortunately. Tell us about that.
As you can imagine, I was still very much flying high after such an amazing event at the Transplant Games. A week later, I continued my training. I was out on my bike, which took me a placement medal, and I was coming around a roundabout, and a lady was not looking where she was going, and into the back of my bike she drove, which, as you can imagine, someone as delicate as a transplant patient getting such a big shock and quite a vicious impact can send alarm bells going off in your mind and panic instantly. It was more so me panicking because I went down on the side of my transplant, which immediately had me in shock and panic. Problem was, that wasn't the only thing, but the problem was my foot was still on the pedal clip, which meant that I had so much pain going through my foot and my ankle, I had no idea what was going on. And later, when the ambulance had come and given me various painkillers to numb the pain, to be able to put me onto a stretcher and cart me off to the hospital, I looked down to see without being too graphic, the angle of my foot, and cried because I was in shock. And I think that was the right response, rather than raging at someone over the fact they had just damaged a bike that costs a fortune to own and operate. But I got to hospital. My foot was in between some sort of orange airbag things to straighten it as much as possible, but we couldn't tell what was swelling on what the angle of the actual foot was until the swelling went down. The foot was still straight, and after some x-rays and some painkillers, I had a break in the talus bone which ultimately needed fixing. So they wrapped me up in sort of a temporary cast until the surgeon came about to look at the x-rays and tell me exactly what was happening. I was rushed to surgery early the next day to have my foot straightened a little bit because it was slightly out, but it was still in a pedal. It's not going to be straight. They put pins and plates into my foot, and I then spent the next couple of months in various different casts, and then essentially had to learn to walk properly again, which, as you can imagine, with my sports and everything, that meant I couldn't compete, I couldn't train. I had to sit down for the vast majority of the day for 9 and a bit months.
As someone who is very active, that must have been very devastating to essentially be grounded to a halt.
Absolutely. It stopped me doing every exercise I could physically do. And I'm not ashamed to say my mindset was disheartened, heartbroken, and upset. But as the saying goes, it really is okay not to be okay. And at that point, I was really not okay.
Did you have any support for your mental health during that time?
I did. So, alongside my family and really caring friends and neighbours, I was speaking to a health professional about how this had psychologically affected me. As someone so active, I rely on being able to move and run to keep the endorphins and my mind at ease and in its happy place. And at that point, I was upset, angry, frustrated, and down about the entire situation. So talking to a health professional eased that load and made it feel less like the world had some sort of vendetta against me doing what I was doing.
So how was the process of your foot healing?
It was long, slow, and frustrating. I knew I couldn't do much with this, and by the time it came to taking the solid cast off and putting one of these big plastic boots on, it was then learning to balance and then taking it out so that I could do physio with a physiotherapist. And it was really painful. And I don't think if I wasn't as willful and positive that I was determined to get back to running events and all my other events that I want to take part in, I don't think my progress would have been as effective as it has been.
I think it really is so important at times like that to have a focus that gives you something to push forward for.
Absolutely.
So through all of this, all that physical and mental distress that you went through because of the injury that you suffered, your kidney lasted, your kidney came through, your kidney kept working. So was there any impact on the kidney at all, or did your kidney function remain the same?
I'm really pleased to say that my kidney function is at 90+% and has continued throughout, even after the shock and impact of landing on it from a bike. It is perfect. It's working fine. And I was so relieved at that point. But the doctor was like, your kidney's fine. Don't panic. I'm like, I'm panicking. Just show me the numbers.
I mean, that is fantastic. It just goes to show how resilient the body is. It really does.
Absolutely.
With everything that you've been through in terms of your Kidney Warrior story, the highs and the lows of everything that you've been through thus far, what is your advice for someone listening who has just been diagnosed with kidney disease, or even someone that's been on their Kidney Warrior journey for some time? What is your advice for them?
So ultimately, my advice is, please remember, if you're going through this, there are plenty of people to talk to, whether that's kidney care, whether that's someone at the dialysis unit that you've met through this incredible journey, or friends, family, or health professionals, as I mentioned. You just need to know you're not alone. There are plenty of people going through this journey. For every day, there are people discovering new things about how they're coping and how you may well benefit from knowing the story. That's why this podcast is fantastic, because you are getting the chance to hear everybody's journey and how they have dealt with it. And in some cases, their recommendations on maybe people to talk to or activities to take part in, so that you're socializing, but also getting a chance to talk about how you're feeling, because it's really hard going to a health professional who hasn't been through the journey. So just remember, if you go through the journey and you feel like you have no one to talk to, there are people, there are groups, and there are plenty of opportunities to talk to people. You just got to notice that you're not feeling okay. And remember, please just reach out. People are here for you. You just got to accept the help, which is ultimately the hardest thing to do. And once you do, that'll open so many doors. You'll share the weight with someone just by talking to them, and you'll feel lighter, maybe mentally more focused. You've also got to remember, you've got to help yourself. So if you are gaining extra weight and you're unsure why, maybe consider going for a 5-minute walk or something with a friend, or on your own with favorite music, your podcast. And I promise you, you will feel better having done the exercise if you continue to do it as a regular thing, not just this guy has said I'm going to feel fantastic after one walk, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying just please continue to stay focused and exercise, because this will ultimately help you in your recovery, as you'll be active, your system will be a healthier, less tense place for your gift of life.
Excellent advice there. Thank you.
Overall, I just want to add one last thing on the extra little pieces here. Whilst I was in clinic seeing my clinician about my transplant results, I noticed on the walls there were little posters advertising group on various things. So the one that I found was on social media for the young adult, and that's a little kidney group created for people like ourselves going through kidney transplants in this instance, where we could all go and talk to each other and share various stories. But also on the part of things like mental health and stuff, Kidney Care has a poster in our clinic specifically, and many others, I'm assuming, telling us their details where they can find support and help and advice along their journey as well.
And Kidney Care UK, their information is in the description box. I know that you're very active on social media, so what are your handles for anyone to give you a follow?
So on Facebook, I go by Tony's Corner. I believe it's listed under Tony's Challenges, and there's a little picture of me there with my race bike from the Transplant Games. The photo was taken just after I found out I'd come back with a medal. So that's how you'll find that picture. And on Instagram, I go by the handle Iron Kidney Life After Transplant. As well as TikTok, I go by the Iron Kidney.
And as always, I will put the links to Tony's social media in the description box. So today, Tony, we have explored your kidney warrior journey, the highs, the lows, haemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis, being in a coma, the disappointment of getting 5 calls for a kidney without receiving a kidney, to finally getting that call and receiving a life-changing kidney transplant. What is your final word of encouragement for the listeners?
Just remember that no matter how the circumstance plays out, as long as you have a positive mindset and the right support, that anything is possible.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for being so open about your struggles, for the advice that you shared. Thank you so much. And thank you as well for the example that you've set for us as kidney warriors of keeping active, looking after ourselves, and keeping going through this journey. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me and creating the space where we can talk about these things.
Thank you for listening to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. I truly appreciate your support. New episodes of this podcast are released every other Monday. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you found this episode helpful, why not share it with someone who might benefit too? To stay up to date with the latest episodes, news and resources, sign up for the email mailing list and join the WhatsApp channel. All the details are in the episode description. Until next time, take care and choose to live.